2018 has been a banner year for PSVR, with acclaimed titles like Astrobot, Tetris Effect, Moss, Beat Saber, and Firewall Zero Hour, just to name a few. But the holidays are upon us, and ladies and gentlemen, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, with exciting titles just over the horizon. With all these amazing titles comes a cost, as many of us continue to scrounge through the couch cushions in hopes of adding just one more gem to our PSVR catalog. This takes us right into my review of In Death by Solfar Studios. In Death is a procedurally generated godless purgatory full of zombies, witches, and various other enemies. Each run of the game is a one-shot or not kind of scenario, with no saves or checkpoints between chapters. Couple this with continually new and in-depth environments, along with random enemy spawns, and you're in for a new high-stakes experience with every go. Let's take a dive into the afterlife. The game puts you in a surreal and enticing environment almost immediately, with its well-written music to accompany the angelic medieval anti-hero tone. The game starts with moderate difficulty, but is not afraid to rear its head and show you what it's made of as you progress. The procedurally generated environment is truly amazing, and keeps the gameplay quite entertaining. I would often end up talking myself into just one more round, after having played for a solid few hours already. It's amazing what a different map layout will do. The floating otherworldly environments are both breathtaking and claustrophobic at times, giving me the heebie-jeebies several times through my playthrough. If you can't take any level of scare in VR, I'd still say give this a shot. But there are definitely going to be those that will struggle with this. The truth is, I wouldn't label this a horror title in the slightest. But the dark tones set with gruesome sound effects and no music did set me on edge a few times. One of the things I really loved about In Death was its ability to capture what a real-life dungeon crawler might feel like, focusing on a bow and arrow as your weapon of choice. The game also offers a variety of arrow types to accompany your trusty bow, along with random portals into your own personal hell for a little extra coin, if you dare. These randomly placed portals are an absolute nightmare, but are rewarding if you can manage. After each round, you're taken to a leaderboard displaying your current rank along with your rank within the last 24 hours. It also shows how many enemies you had taken out along the way, how much gold you had collected, and much more. This will bring a great level of competition to any serious player, adding to the game's replayability. Solfar Studios also included a well-executed teleportation system, using your bow and a special arrow to get you out of a tight spot or hurdle you up to the highest point in the map. While I do truly enjoy the teleportation mechanic, and it may actually be one of the better ones that I've used, there were a few things that were a bit odd during my playthrough. When starting up my review copy of In Death, I noticed a few issues right out of the gates. First, the moves didn't seem to work at all. I found this odd as all I had heard about the game prior, namely that it's an archery game, would need to use two hands. This didn't last, however, as the developers released a patch the very next day to address this issue. I have to say their response to this issue was phenomenal, and gives me a ton of hope for the following issues I have with this game. Once the move controls were up and running, it was time to give it a go. The movement using dual move controllers is, well, it's odd, but certainly not the worst I've experienced. You'll use the trigger on the right hand to walk forward, with the option to use point of view movement or the direction of your bow to move. The big issue with this is, naturally, the right-handed trigger also grabs the bow so that you may pull an arrow back and fire. I often found myself in a crisis trying to run away from a sticky situation while accidentally grabbing and lobbing an unnecessary arrow into the wall. Trust me when I say it's panic-inducing and often leads to immediate death. From there, the move controllers seemed to further struggle. I noticed when grabbing my bowstring and pulling back to release an arrow that my arrows just wouldn't go as fast or as far as what I could produce using the DualShock 4. I came to realize through trial and error that it was near impossible to fully pull back the bowstring for maximum distance and speed without attempting to readjust my real-world point of view or camera placement. Even when doing that, I still had issues more often than I would like to admit. This was a huge problem when comparing gameplay to the DualShock 4, as the arrows pulled back all the way using the DualShock 4 would cause more damage, be more accurate, and would allow for much further travel when using the teleport mechanic. I will say, this is not a deal breaker, as I had a blast with this game while using the DS4. They integrated the mechanics well, and once you unlock the crossbow, the DS4 feels all the more natural. Another issue I found was with the enemy AI. While most of the time shooting an arrow in a crowd of baddies would send all of them in your direction, there were many times where an enemy was in the same room, but because I shot at one enemy while the other was on the far side, I was only attacked by one. Further, enemies seemed to spawn as I approached them. I only knew this as I often could hear the grunts or sounds they make as they fall from the respawn. I assume this has to do with the hardware itself not being able to have all these enemies at once, so overall, I'll give this a pass. As always, I played this game on an original PS4, and I must say, I was impressed. The dark cathedral walls and grisly enemies were well designed and made for quite an immersive experience. The large scale and overwhelming nature of the environments works great as well. After each map, I often had to stop to simply take in the scope of what I had to overcome next. It gave me the feeling of standing at the gate of a giant castle, knowing full well that I would have to scale the beast to overcome its inhabitants. Epic. I really enjoyed In Death for its creative movement concepts, visual style, tonality, and often heart-pounding action. My only real complaint with the experience itself is a double-edged sword that I honestly question mentioning in this review. When playing through these tight corridors, I often found myself wishing there was just more to hear in the environment. The sound effects during combat were spot on, however I wished for more sound as I was walking through, and often even wished there were just a bit of music to help with the atmosphere. Here's the grain of salt to this, however. The music lacking space sets a dark and heavy tone, one in which I think So Far Studios had intended. So in short, I think I may possibly be a minority in this opinion, and don't think this really impacts the game's playability in the slightest. As a side note, I can't help but think about how great this experience would be in multiplayer. Progressing through these environments would be amazing with a buddy or two, and would make for some very interesting and fast-paced combat. Perhaps that's just wishful thinking, but let's hope I'm just getting ahead of myself. I truly enjoyed In Death, and had a hard time making a solid decision for my verdict here. On one hand, the gameplay is very engaging and high stakes, while on the other hand, I would have loved to use the move controllers with an effective control scheme and a bit more of an intuitive explanation of the gameplay mechanics. I am hesitant to recommend this game with some of the initial problems I have had, but I honestly really want to recommend it. I had a ton of fun playing this title, and I will be back in this virtual world often to get a higher score and progress through this ever-changing limbo. With the price being set at $29.99, however, I know many are going to struggle with this title as it stands without putting forth the additional effort to master the control schemes and game mechanics. With that in mind, I will give this game my recommendation with a strong word of caution. If you're up to the challenge of spending the time to fully grasp the mechanics of the game, it's worth it. But as the game stands currently with an almost $30 price point, you may have to take a second look before you buy. As for me, I'm gonna go kill me some baddies.